World of Warcraft is back, and boy oh boy do we have a lot to talk about, which is everything that has been announced for Midnight, every little thing that you will be getting, and why you should be excited for this, and should you pre-order it. More on that at the end of the video. Confirmed, Demon Hunter will be getting a third spec called Devourer, as we have probably data mined. This leak has been kind of true, although the information that we had leading up to this was probably not, since it was called Entropy and it was stated to wield a two-hander pole-armed scythe type thing. Obviously not the case, at least from the cinematic we can definitely tell that it wields dual-wielded warglaives. However, we do know a couple of things about it without having access to test it yet. It's not currently playable for anybody that we know. It will also be a mid-range combat spec. We don't know what that means. It could mean Evoker, it could mean Survival Hunter, where most of your abilities are ranged abilities. Hopefully it's not Evoker, because we have played with what it means to have 25-yard range on abilities, and it is not fun. Outside of that, we know a couple of abilities that it will have, one of which is Reap, a scythe attack that consumes soul fragments. Suffice to say that it does still play with soul fragments, the core Demon Hunter mechanic, and that's going to play further into another ability in a second. The next ones are Void, Blade, and Hungering Slash, a melee combat with Retreat. This sounds like Chaos Strike and Blade Dance, or at least with a combination of Vengeful Retreat, that we can assume that you use this to go out of range, build some resources, and go back in and probably finish the target. Something that's, personally, I have advocated for Survival Hunter to be in terms of a mid-range spec where you build some type of combos and stacks and buffs at a particular range and then swap your range to finish off your target, whether it's melee or ranged. Collapsing Star is probably what you've seen in the cinematic with a big spirit bomb thrown at the enemy. I'm not sure if this is supposed to replace the I-beam version of it, but probably not, because the next ability is Void Ray, piercing beam of void energy. Clearly the I-beam version of this particular spec, which I would imagine it would activate your Metamorphosis ability, called Void Metamorphosis this time. This feels more like a placeholder name. Void Metamorphosis sounds a little bit funky. Might just be Metamorphosis in the end, because it's the same type of Metamorphosis for Havoc and Vengeance, although this is Voidy. So the transformation is sustained by soul harvesting, which leads me to believe that it works in a similar way where Shattered Destiny works for Havoc, where the more fury you consume, the longer you can extend your demonic. This is the more soul fragments you consume, the longer you can extend the metamorphosis here. Now, this is a very tricky mechanic because it has been implemented in the past with very little success with Priest, when it had the insanity constantly drained and you had to constantly generate resource to be able to maintain your void form, and that has been taken away. It was the same mechanic with Breath of Sindragosa for Frost Decay, where you constantly drain your energy and constantly have to generate your runic power to keep up Breath of Sindragosa. This is a mechanic that hasn't been popular with players, so I assume it will probably function differently, maybe akin to how Aldrich, the hero talents, work, where you have souls that spawn and then Fellblade, or an ability in this case for Void Demon Hunter, for Devourer, that collects those soul fragments. You don't have to individually run over them, since that seems to be a little bit annoying to play with. Moving on to what also has been kind of speculated to be within the Midnight is the new zones, particularly Eversong Woods is the first zone that we're going to talk about, and what you have seen in the cinematic as well. Silver Moon, Quel'Thalas, all of that goodness is going to be remade and not just be a side zone. It will actually be one of the new zones of the expansion. And I know what you're thinking, but you want a new zone, don't you? You don't want old rehashed content. Listen, this is a good example of how they can remake the old world with so many dead zones that have nothing to do with anything and repurpose them for the content. Having all new zones all the time is not necessarily the best thing, since it's very hard for people to relate with new zones. Tell me you love Ringing Deeps. Tell me you love Ash Kahet or Isle of Dorn. You might love Hallowfall, that's a little bit cool. But all of these new zones, and I bet you, if you name all of the past two expansion zones, you're definitely going to miss one or forget the name of at least two. So don't tell me you want new zones. All zones that have very hard tie-ins to the story can reignite that passion, that nostalgic feeling that we have, and I think Eversong Woods is definitely going to do that as well, because it's going to come out as a package deal with a bunch of other old Blood Elfy things. One of which is the second zone, Zul'Aman. Not really Blood Elfy, but it is very tied to the High Elves because of the old grudges between the High Elves, or Blood Elves that they are known now, and the Amani Trolls that has started the whole Burning Crusade, Zul'Aman being a raid and then being a dungeon, and now it is a full-fledged zone. There are some story tie-ins with the Trolls that are kind of being corrupted by other Trolls, so we're about to save them, and maybe we can also get the Amani as an allied race in the future patch of Midnight. That would be one of my personal goals, but Zul'Aman is a very totemic, very voodooish, very druidish zone that's been corrupted by the void, and we want to save that zone to liberate the captive trolls as part of the new content. And we're gonna have dungeons tied to these zones as well. But that's with the old zones. One of the new zones will be Voidstorm. We have no idea where this zone currently is. It's probably in the void. Maybe it's something akin to the Telegross Rift that void elves spawn in, or maybe akin to Koresh, where they're like in a different part of the world, galaxy, cosmos, whatever you want to call it. This is Voidstorm. This is where Xal'atath's main headquarters are that we know for sure. Then we're going to hunt third down, and it's likely the first raid is going to be here, but more on raids in a second. And the last zone, Harandar, to kind of tie in a little bit with the Zul'Aman being broken by the void, it's clear that the void is going to mess Azeroth up. And what better people to call upon to heal and remake Azeroth than the Haranir, which are also going to be coming as an allied race together with this zone. And they're going to be finally in the game. We know, of course, that they will have a couple of classes: warrior, hunter, rogue, priest, shaman, mage, warlock, monk, druid, on top of being able to have a unique little aesthetic called bioluminescence, where their models and their customizations and some of their armor will glow with a faint luminescence type effect, kind of akin to how they're living underground, and they're using shrooms from what it looks like, and moss and other types of bio life to illuminate their ways, because they're clearly not on the surface, and that light that we see in the background is clearly not Beladar. On top of all of this, these have been data mined before the War Within even launched, and we know that you can customize them in all sorts of ways. We know that they could possibly have a heritage armor in tune, and all of these were delayed and probably repurposed for Midnight, since we know that they were probably scheduled to be released within the War Within, but things have changed, so now we're getting them in Midnight. Next up, housing. We already knew housing was going to come, and it's fully customizable. If you've missed the boat on everything that housing has been announced, know that you will have your own house. It will be in your neighborhood that you can choose to be a public neighborhood joined by random people, to be a neighborhood made out of your guildies or your friends, so you don't have to have undesirables in your own neighborhood, up to a limit, I would imagine, since there's only so many instance zones that the servers can create without lagging the shit out of everybody. On top of this, you will have a lot of customizable options to decorate your house to your liking. We're going to have videos on it as we will test the player housing at Gamescom as well. And it's just going to give you the whole feel of going back home to World of Warcraft. A new system called the Prey system, akin to the gimmick of this expansion. It seems what this means is that you as a player will be able to choose an enemy, to choose the difficulty of that enemy, whether it's normal, hard, or nightmare. And then you will embark on a hunt for that enemy, probably looking at clues, probably searching it on the map, and you might get potentially ambushed by your own prey, and then you will engage in combat. The prey can be a difficult one to fight, depending on the difficulty that you've chosen. And this is an open world combat system where you will enjoy a slew of rewards from transmogs, mounts, and housing, customizable on top of other things as well. It will not be a progression system. It will not be burrow power. It will not be player power of any kind. Just pure fun out in the open. Now let's talk about some of the bigger announcements right now. The Midnight expansion will launch with 3 available raids off the bat. Really cool. But these are not what you might think. There are 3 raids, but in total across all of these raids, there will be only 9 bosses. The first raid will be the Void Spire, a 6-boss raid within the Voidstorm zone that serves as Xal'atath's stronghold, like we mentioned before. The second raid will be the Dream Rift, a single boss raid that takes players to a place where the veil between primordial dreams and brutal reality is thin. This sounds very much like what the Emerald Dream was supposed to be, probably tied to the Harranar or the Harandir zone, since it does feel like it's very naturey, and that's the naturey part of our expansion. And the March on Quell Danas, a 2-boss raid with large story spoilers, and we're gonna get more details on this raid soon, but judging by how they phrase this, it's very likely that some of our beloved characters will die, which would explain why the Blizzard team didn't want to spoil anything for us. And if we know anything from the cinematic, it's probably Lor'themar or maybe Liadrin are going to die in this raid. But this is a big thing for endgame, because raiding has been very stale and formulaic for a lot of years, so this could actually change and revamp all of the endgame when it's tied to raiding, and give them options to design more stuff, like what is the loot going to be? Will we have tier pieces in all 3? Will they all be weekly locked like everything else? Will we have special items and trinkets in one of the raids where they can have like unique effects, like the cantrip trinkets or armor pieces that have their own, embellishments type effects to them? Everything is possible with these raids, so it's very interesting to see how they will play out once we have access to them. And it opens up the door for them to do maybe this style of content when it comes to raiding every patch and change the whole raiding endgame forever. We will also get a new epic PvP battleground, the 40 versus 40 people battleground that we haven't had since, I believe, Warlords of Draenor. So finally, maybe PvP is getting more love, even though it's just a battleground at the moment. We can only hope that the PvP scene will be revitalized. It is called Slayer's Rise and is going to have a lot of objectives, very strategic and focused. Not much information has been released about it. If we can get to test it, we might also have information on it in the future. We will have 8 new dungeons, with the starting one being Windrunner's Spire, heavily tied to the Windrunner sister. Maybe we'll get to see Sylvanas back. Magister's Terrace, once again, a very mage-focused dungeon this time around. Murder Row, one more Blood Elf dungeon within Silvermoon. Den of Nalarak, Mysara Caverns, Blinding Veil, Nexus Point Zenith, and Void Scar Arena. All of these dungeons are looking already so cool. We'll have a video on it soon as well. Of course, we'll have new delves coming with everything in. Midnight Ends, Transmog will finally be free. Also, to round up the video, we need to talk about the pre-purchase or pre-order system of the expansion, which is something that's going to cause a little bit of friction with the community. Of course, as with every expansion, you're going to have an option to pre-purchase where you get a lot of goodies, a character boost, 2,000 trading tenders, customizable portraits for your housing, mounts and transmog sets, and 3-day early access, which has happened with the War Within and caused a lot of backlash from the community. I am not a fan of the 3-day early access, and it's very tricky to do with a positive PR as far as what the content implies goes, but I still believe, even though this is definitely going to make them more money because they're not going to do this for free, it most likely alleviates the stress on the servers from everybody logging in at the same time, even though there's always going to be stresses and issues when expansions launches. We can argue that the lags and bugs this time around maybe were slightly smaller than they were back in the Warlords of Draenor days. Back in the Legion, Dalaran has been teleported out of the existence and everybody fell to their death days. A lot of issues can be solved if, let's say, half of the player base pre-orders and logs in 3 days early, and the other half logs in a little bit later. Of course, this causes issues where last time people that logged in 3 days early were able to speed level through a bunch of stuff because of some bugs. The bugs were fixed, but the retroactive experience wasn't taken away, so people ended up exploiting something just because they paid early and they got a lot of advantages over the other players, which in reality, there's not that much advantages you can get by leveling 3 days faster, since the season will probably start a week or two after the expansion releases anyway, so there's plenty of time to level, but it still feels kind of poop when you have a lot of endgame things that are tied to just being max level quicker, like professions and how people can max and farm their professions way quicker. And if they have 3 days early access, they're definitely going to be ahead of everybody else, and that just makes everybody else a little bit slower to catch up and always kind of a little bit behind. So I am not a fan for that. Hopefully the way they implement the 3 days early access is going to be very different this time around. Overall, Midnight is definitely looking like WoW is back, and there's so much more to talk about, and we cannot wait to cover more stuff from here, from Gamescom, from the hotel room. But until then, you better watch this video right here, because if you're not currently convinced that Paladins are going to have a big role in the next expansion, then I don't know what to tell you. But if you are, just learn how to play Red now before it's too late.